friends, and welcome to this edition of Pep Talk. It's supposed to pep us up and not supposed to be long. And so, hear me out. Over the last few years, especially with the Trump presidency, and with the advent of social media proliferation, many of us have seen parts of the United States that we've never seen before. Horrific parts and horrific things, whether it's the wicked knee of a policeman on George Floyd's neck or whatever it is. We've had all these exposures to things we could not even imagine would happen in the greatest nation in the world. Let me tell you something. Everything rises and falls on leadership. Africa is not the problem. Leadership is. Just like we've seen in the last few years in countries in Europe and we've seen in America. We've seen with leadership, prime ministership in Britain. Failure of states is not the preserve of any nation, and the flourishing of states is not the preserve of any nation. Every nation, any nation rises and falls on its leadership. There are three things. There are principles of life that touch on every aspect of life, including leadership. When these principles are lived by, nations do well, families do well, churches, organizations do well. When they are broken, we don't. It's easier to appreciate the physical principles and the chemical principles because we can see and feel and smell and touch them, right? Like gravity, it's a principle, but they are leadership principles. The nations that live by principles, these timeless, universal truths that make this world run, prosper. The nations that don't live by principles don't prosper. The nations whose principles, I'm talking about their leaders, live by these principles prosper. Those that don't prosper. And it applies to families, it applies to communities, it applies to organizations and churches, name it. Of course, those of us who believe in spiritual things know that over every nation, over every territory, there are also what is called principalities. These are spirits that have territorial control, that want to oppress nations and not let them come into their full manifestation. But guess what? If you have principals, leaders, who live by principles, including spiritual principles on how to deal with these powers, those nations, those families, those communities, those churches, those organizations, institutions will prosper. Africans, let's stop blaming how bad we are to principalities. It's a lack of following principles, all of us, but especially the lack of our principals from leading the way they should. We have an opportunity on October 7th, all of us, to learn more of these principles. As principals, whether we are executives in companies, we are pastors of communities, whether we are churches, whether we are student leaders, whether we work with the public sector, with the government, the establishment, because we must all learn to lead. When the leader gets better, everything and everyone else also gets better. It's time to take on the principalities that are oppressing and not making us prosper as nations, as families, as communities, as organizations. And it will come from the principals who will live by the principles of leadership and lead the rest of us to do the same. Don't blame the principalities. And you can't blame the principles. It all lies on the principals. Take care.